This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So as you know,
Sorry, Rabbi,
yes, Leah.
can you enlarge the document like you did
Let
last
me
time?
try. Good point. Thank you. Let me see what I can do. No, that didn't work. It's not what we wanted to do. But let me see what we can do. Bingo. Okay, let me just get rid of the tabs. There we go. Okay. That better? You see that? You're making me better. Thank you, Leah. Okay. So I'm just back from South Florida. So I want to read an article that came out about a week ago, actually. Synagogue sues Florida, saying abortion restrictions violate religious freedoms. Religion, particularly the influence of Christian conservatives, has been at the heart of the anti-abortion movement and the push to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 ruling legalizing abortion throughout the United States, which is pretty amazing when we think about it. That we'll get to some of the history, the background, that it actually was, I was born in 1962. So for me, it was like a given that abortion is something that people can have. But it wasn't until I was 11 years old that I actually had this ruling. But a lawsuit filed last week by a South Florida synagogue challenges new legislation in the state banning most abortions after 15 weeks, saying it violates the state's constitution's right to privacy and freedom of religion, right? So as we'll see, we walk now this is not an Orthodox synagogue, but at the same time, we're going to see that from an Orthodox Torah point of view, this overturning of Roe v. Wade will also be problematic. So we will continue. In Jewish law, the suit argues abortion is required if necessary to protect the health, mental, or physical well-being of the woman. We agree with that to a certain degree. It's certainly required when it's protecting the health and the physical well-being, and we'll see the mental well-being. So there are lots of different ways to slice it. So I wouldn't say, well, in certain cases, it could be required. That'll be a little bit more nuanced. Florida's state law limiting abortion, signed by Governor DeSantis in April, goes into effect July 1st. In banning abortions after 15 weeks, it does not make exceptions for cases of incest, rape, or human trafficking. And certainly there are those who would halachically say in the case of the mental anguish of a woman in a case of incest or rape, often that's young girls. There certainly are those that would allow for that. It does, however, allow for abortion if the mother's life is endangered, which certainly something that we would say would be almost a requirement, or if two doctors determine that the fetus has a fatal abnormality. Okay, so then again, we're going to be drawing the line from a Jewish point of view of how fatal is this? If the child has a developmental issue that makes it incompatible with life, meaning the child might last for a few hours, even a few days, but basically it is incompatible with life. So then from a halachic point of view, that would be allowed. Once we're getting into something like Tay-Sachs, so then we'll see there are a range of different opinions. And one of the things the Jewish community has really started years ago. This was Natalie and I did this before we got married, and that's going back. This summer will be 40 years, so that's going back quite a while. there's something called Dor Yesharim, which means in Hebrew straight generations, and there young men and young women will get themselves tested, and their results will be in a database. They won't be told if they're a carrier or not, because it's only if they are a carrier, it's only an issue if the person that they're interested in marrying is also a carrier. So no one needs to know if they're a carrier or not. That can create stigma or worries, apprehension. But you submit. This is right. So you get your number and you submit the numbers, and they'll let you know green light to go ahead. So, but again, in a situation where the child, they can diagnose that has Tay-Sachs already when it's in embryo. So then the question is about abortion there, and there are different approaches. The law was challenged early this month by the ACLU of Florida on behalf of a group of abortion providers and abortion rights organizations. Deeply rooted Jewish teachings, which we'll see the sources between this week and I think next week, indicate that abortion is permissible and even required if a mother's life is in danger, said Jewish leaders from across the ideological spectrum. In Jewish thought, it is also widely accepted that as long as a fetus is in the womb, it has potential, but not full personhood, and that carries much weight also. The 2022 National Survey of Jewish Voters conducted by the Jewish Electorate Institute found that 75% of the Jews said they were concerned the Supreme Court would overturn Roe. Among Orthodox Jews, the issue is more nuanced, said Rabbi Moshe Hauer, Executive VP of the OU. Abortion is necessary if a mother faces grave physical or psychological harm, but is not permitted because of simple difficulty or a belief in the right to choose. Jewish law believes we have an incredible responsibility to life and even to potential life. So as we will soon see, we're not all that eager to have the government dictate to us. We would prefer to have the government stand back and let us follow our laws and our Jewish conscience and our laws. And separation of church and state is good, though there are lots of nuances of that. There's a recent ruling of the Supreme Court that allows public funds to go towards private education. There was a certain case that just happened in Maine that the state would support parents who want to send their children to private education, but only if it was non-religious education. And they were sued for that's taking away my freedom of religion, or that's involving themselves, that they'll only support whatever. I don't know the nuances, but the separation of church and state is a delicate balance that for the most part works well for us. Okay, so with that, let us start to look at the sources. I emailed it out earlier. Those who want to be on the list of those that I email it out to, please send me an email after the class, and I will have you added to the list of those that I send the source sheet to. Okay. So background. Number one, in 2008, there were 40 million abortions worldwide. 20% of all pregnancies ended in abortions. The rates vary throughout the world. New York Times, 2011, 2009 abortion rate in New York City of 40%. Wow, 40%. 2 out of every 5 pregnancies, right, have ended in an abortion in New York City. Number 2, in 1821, Connecticut became the first state to criminalize abortion. banning the selling of abortion-inducing poison to women. It did not punish the women who took the poison. Legal consequences for women began in 1845, when New York criminalized a woman's participation in her abortion. By the early 1900s, influenced primarily by physicians fearing its safety, most states had banned abortion. That makes sense, right? The medical level in the early 1900s was somewhat primitive in terms of our understanding of bacteria, infections, and all that. By 1965, all 50 states had outlawed abortion, with some exceptions varying by state. Federal action on abortion did not occur until Roe v. Wade in 1973, which declared most state anti-abortion laws unconstitutional. The High Court's 7-2 decision established rules based on a pregnancy trimester framework, banning legislative interference in the first trimester of pregnancy, allowing states to regulate abortion during the second trimester and third trimester, but only when related to maternal health. Okay, so we know there is, right, pro-life, pro-choice. And as I mentioned, it's the Jewish view is a lot more nuanced than full speed in any one of those directions. Pro-choice and proud. Number 3, the ability to access safe and legal abortion has been critical for many women as they seek to define and live their lives with dignity. Honoring women means honoring their choices, including the choice of whether and when to have children. Women are capable of making intelligent and conscientious decisions about their own lives and families. Women deserve the autonomy and dignity to act in accordance with their personal convictions and to decide what is best for their own lives and families. Women should be trusted and respected to exercise the choices about their bodies and lives that are best for them, and not be forced by the government into personal reproductive decisions that are against their will. Fair enough, right? We agree in principle with all that, but at the same time, we would say, I know Bill Cosby is not very popular these days, but I remember in his more popular days a quote, when you discipline your kids, we took you into this world, we can take you out of this world, right? And many parents at certain points might say, I want to kill this kid, right? It's affecting my life, it's affecting everything. But of course, no one would say that once the child is born, that one can kill the child. So, the ability to choose what works for their family, everyone agrees that it stops at a certain point. The question is, and everyone agrees it stops at birth. Everyone agrees that it does not go into effect before conception. The question is, from the point of conception to birth, then how much pro-choice should be granted. The other side of the coin, the National Right to Life Committee, number 4. While there are many things society can and should do to ensure that women are never denied basic rights or opportunities on account of their sex or reproductive status, to claim that these rights require the death of the innocent is to undermine the very foundations of justice itself. Okay? In other words, they're viewing abortion as death of the innocent. This is the other end of the spectrum. We believe in freedom, but absolute freedom to do whatever one wishes without limits cannot exist. If people are free to choose to harm or kill one another for any reason whatsoever, all live in fear, not freedom. Society has something at stake when one human being claims the right to kill another or to decide who is worthy of life. And once again, this is viewing the unborn child as one human being claims the right to kill another. This is viewing an unborn child as a full human being. And everyone agrees that a full human being, we can't take the life of one to save another. Actually, halachically, there are situations where we can. That's the situation known as a road, where one person is pursuing another in order to take that person's life. And we will see how that works its way into our discussion when we move on to the halachic sources. Let's continue over
Rabbi,
here. Yes, Steve.
yeah, here we're talking about fetuses, but the language of what we just read really could be expanded to include living persons too, and so
Yes, yes. And the pro-life consider the fetus to be a fully living being. And therefore they argue the same way that no one would agree that, parents can decide to kill infanticide, I believe it's called, can decide to kill their children. So too they say, well, this is a living being, fully living being. They view it as a fully living being. And therefore, the same way a parent can't kill a child, so too the parent will not be able to abort a pregnancy. That is their view. Like I said, at the edge of the spectrum, you have the pro-choice and you have the pro-life. Pro-life will view the fetus as a fully living being, and therefore, the same way that no one says I can kill someone else because they are impacting, a quality of life. So too you can't kill this fetus because it is impacting your quality of life. Yes. Let's now go to the Jewish view, which, like we said, is far more nuanced, and it's from Dr. Daniel Eisenberg. While the Jewish world has the Torah from which to seek guidance, the secular world must rely on consensus, right? And that is the key, that we are going to look to the Torah to understand what is it that God wants us to do in these situations, and how does he view. And we'll see from the Torah how this unborn baby is viewed. Secular society demands several things from physicians. Any healthcare decision promoted by the physician be in the patient's best interest. Beneficence. That the physician do no harm, non-maleficence, and that the health care be provided in a fair and equitable way to all without prejudice, justice. But these requirements are dwarfed by the fourth, that the patient has the ultimate responsibility and final decision-making capacity with respect to healthcare decisions. So the patient has what we call the autonomy. The question naturally arises how a patient without medical training can exercise their autonomy if they do not understand the choices being placed before them. That is why one of the most important requirements in allowing for true patient autonomy is the concept of informed consent. The patient must be given enough information to allow for an educated and reasoned healthcare decision. The usual secular understanding of informed consent is predicated upon the right of the individual to express his or her autonomy by deciding which actions will or will not be allowed to be performed on the body. That is the secular view. However, the Jewish view adds on a very, very important layer here. Since man was created in the image of God and his body is the property of the Creator, man is given only custodial rights to his body. Right? One of the blessings that we say in the morning, the Elokai Neshama, speaks about our being entrusted, and also the modim that we say in our Amidah is that God has Achayenu hamasurim biyadecha, our lives are in your hands. That our neshamot are pekudot lach, are pekudot lach, entrusted to you. Right? So we view that our lives are given to us, so to speak, on loan from God. And therefore we need to be, as we say by number 6 there, a prudent steward. Since man is created in the image of God and his body is the property of the Creator, man is given only custodial rights to his body. The key distinction between the secular and Jewish approaches to informed consent is the difference between rights and obligations. The secular emphasis on autonomy inescapably leads to the conclusion the patient has the right to refuse any and all medical information, the right to refuse. In Judaism, both becoming informed and giving consent for appropriate treatment are required. As the prudent steward of one's own body, one must acquaint oneself with all reasonable medical options, including inaction, before making a decision. But after evaluating all reasonable options, the Torah requires, it's more of an obligation, one to choose the sensible option, the one that the prudent steward would choose. So if I recognize that this body is mine, so to speak, on loan from God, then I have an obligation to choose accordingly within the parameters of our understanding. Halacha literally means lahalech, lalechet. It's a pathway. It is to go in the pathway that God wants us to go. And one, as the prudent steward, would need to follow that. Yes, Leah.
I have a question. Is this the reason, like the fact that we're just the custodials on over our body? Is this the reason that people that take their own lives are buried behind the fence, so to speak? Is their Judaism
Okay.
taken away from them?
Okay. So nowadays, we no longer will bury someone outside the fence, but let's deal with the point that you're bringing up. And Judaism is not taken away. Right? If a person is born Jewish, that person dies Jewish. There's nothing that we can do to take away our being Jewish. If a person converts to another religion, we don't recognize that as a valid conversion, and the person remains Jewish. But yes, getting to the core of your point, yes, suicide, killing a human being is prohibited, whether it's killing another human being, murdering another human being is prohibited, whether it's murdering another human being or murdering oneself. And that also gets back to this idea that our body is loaned to us. This comes up, right? So we can't, heaven forbid, take our own life. This also comes up very often in the world today, not in the suicide world, but in the medical world today, towards the end of life, where doctors had a situation where the family was feeling a lot of pressure. The doctors often, the hospital, often having pressure from the insurance companies, is looking at quality of life and looks to expedite when there is not what they would consider to be quality of life. Whereas we look at life as a standalone quality. Life has value. Every moment of life has value. And even though a person might be in an unconscious state, as far as we understand, but there are many situations that people come to when they were in this deep coma, they were actually aware of what was going on around them. And certainly in a spiritual sense, the person is very much alive at that point as the soul is getting ready to leave the body and to leave the restraints and the constraints of being in a physical body. And thoughts and decisions and regrets, whatever it might be that a person might have then, can have a very, very powerful impact on who they are, on their state as when they actually die, and therefore can affect what we understand to be their eternity. So yes, this idea affects suicide and also affects expediting end of life for a person that we are very much against, and very often um, families will call upon me to help strengthen them in the battles that they're having with the doctors and the hospital where they are at, and that's only gotten worse over the years in terms of that pressure. Anything that we can do to alleviate the pain, we certainly do that, even if there is a chance that alleviating the pain with morphine or whatever it might be might end up expediting a person's leaving this world. But if we're doing it to alleviate the pain and not to expedite, then that is perfectly fine, even though it might expedite along the way. But yes, our bodies is a gift given to us on loan, and that's why also staying healthy is considered v'nishmartem ma'od lenafshotechem. The pasuk says actually in a different context, but the sages take that as a standalone, that v'nishmartem ma'od, you have to be very careful when it comes to your life, and you need to be healthy, eat healthy, live healthy. That is of great importance, because this was, if I lend you my car and you don't do any oil changes and you just let it run into the ground, then you have not been a prudent steward of the car that I lent you. And the same idea applies also to our bodies. Okay, but again, when it comes to the Jewish point of view, an individual okay, is that where you were? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. One must acquaint oneself. The Torah requires one to choose a sensible option, the one that the prudent steward would choose. Number 7, Rabbi David Bleich. Judaism is fundamentally a religion of law. Halacha governs virtually every facet of human endeavor. But it's not that we get lost in the minutia of these laws. It is these halachas that shape our understanding of life, of living, of the world, of medicine, of all of these things. An individual who seeks to find answers with the Jewish tradition can deal with such questions in only one way. He must examine them through the prism of halacha, for it is in the corpus of Jewish law, as elicited and transmitted from generation to generation, that God has made his will known to man. Right? That really is a very fundamental idea, that the only way that we know, right? We speak about this often, right? Every religion has its revelation narrative. A religion is living down here, God's up there. What am I supposed to do? Every religion has its revelation narrative. Judaism is unique, that God's revelation was not to an individual or a few individuals, but it was to the nation at large. Right? So I might be able to convince you, probably not very effectively, that God spoke to me and we're starting a new religion, but I can't convince you that God spoke to you and therefore we're starting a new religion. But the Torah, both the written and oral Torah, is the transmission that we've gotten from God, and that thereby gives us the parameters of what we understand as God's will. So we look to halacha as to what is God's will in these different situations. Okay, let's go to sources for abortion in the Torah and the Talmud. Okay, Bereshit, the pasuk says, Shfach dam adam ba'adam, damo yishafech. If a person spills the blood of a person, ba'adam, the verse says, the blood of a person in a person, damo yishafech, his blood shall be spilled. Why? Ki b'tzelem elokim asa et ha'adam. And God made, in the image of God, man has been made. And therefore, we're going beyond ourselves once we start messing with a person's life. The wording here is interesting. Shafach dam ha'adam, you spilled the blood of a person, ba'adam, in a person. Now, there's another way of viewing this, of understanding where this clause, this word ba'adam in a person, right? There are those that say, Shfach dam adam, ba'adam damo yishafech. If you spill the blood of a person, you will be put to death in a way that doesn't spill your blood. Ba'adam damo yishafech. His blood will be spilled internally, so to speak. But the way Rabbi Yisroel understands this is source number 9. Mishum Yishmael Amru, Ben Noach neherag af al ha'ubarin. Noahide will be put to death for murder, even when it comes to an ubar, to a fetus. Maitame, what's the reason, Rabbi Yishmael? Dichtiv, shvoch dam ha'adam ba'adam. One who spills the blood of a person. Again, the key word ba'adam, in a person, damo yeshafech, his blood will be spilled. Ezu adam shehu ba'adam. What is the blood of a person in a person? When do we have a person inside another person? Havi omer ze ubar imo. That is an ubar, a fetus in the mother's womb. Okay, so that is the case where, according to Rabbi Yishmael, at least, it is clear that the Torah prohibits taking the blood of a person who's in another person, which of course is a fetus. Secondly, number 10, we have the 10 commandments. Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. And as we saw above, there are those that will view this as murder. The pro-life certainly views abortion as murder and going against the 10 commandments. There are others who view it differently, and we'll soon see that in a halachic vein also, there are those that view it as actual murder.
Rabbi,
Okay. Yes.
Rabbi, yeah, I'm
Yes.
sorry. The one just previous to this, that on its surface, that would seem to preclude abortion.
Yes. According to Rabbi Yishmael. Now, as you know from your extensive Talmudic experience, Steve, that when we're mentioning a name that's attached to a certain opinion, that means the consensus, what we call the Rabbanan or the Chachamim, disagree.
Felt different.
Otherwise, it would not be attributed to one person. So that is not, in general, that one, when it's attributed to one person, that is not the consensus opinion, as the case over here. That is not the consensus opinion.
Thank you.
But according to Rabbi Yishmael, absolutely. According to Rabbi Yishmael, absolutely, that is a prohibition against abortion. Okay, I mentioned number 10, right? Lo tirtzach from the 10 commandments, you shall not murder. Now, the next case is very interesting. This discusses, again in Mishpatim, and this discusses two guys fighting. And in the course of their fighting, they ended up hitting a pregnant woman, and she miscarried. So let's see how the psukim view that. And this will be very, 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 very informative. So number 11, when two men fight, v'nagfu, and they smote, hit, ishahara, a pregnant woman, v'yatsu yiladea, and she lost the baby, she miscarried. V'lo yiyeh ason, if there is no fatal injury, there is no death, the woman was not killed, but she lost, anosh yanesh, the one who struck her will be punished and will be penalized to pay a monetary payment. How much? Kasher yashit alav bal ha'isha, a woman's husband will sue for it, v'natan b'flilim, and the value of the monetary payment will be given based on the plilim, based on the judges. The imason yihiyeh, but if there is a fatal injury, if the woman died, then v'natata nefesh tachat nefesh, then it will be a soul for a soul, at least according to the opinion that says that in such a case, if I meant to kill A and I killed B, there's a death penalty, then there will be a death penalty. So we see the psukim are clearly differentiating between the death of the mother, of the pregnant woman, I should say, and the death of the fetuses. Now, when there is a capital punishment in the case of murder, then there are no monetary penalties that go along with that, right? A person shoots someone with a gun and kills him, but also ruins his Gucci suit when the bullet went through, right? So from a halachic point of view, this person is liable for a capital punishment for murder. He does not owe the family the cost of replacing or repairing the Gucci suit. So if there is monetary damages, I pay monetary damages. If it's a murder case, there are no monetary damages. If this pregnant woman died, it's a capital case. But if she miscarried, it's not a capital case. Rather, it is a monetary case. So we see there that we don't view this embryo, the taking of the life of the embryo, that is not viewed as absolute murder. That is clear. Yes, Cheryl.
So, excuse me. What are the cities of refuge about? Isn't that for an unintentional?
Yes. Okay. The cities of refuge are in a case where I didn't intend to kill anybody.
Right.
I went and I'm chopping wood, and the axe flies off, a splinter flies off and kills someone. That is what the cities of refuge are for. But again, over here, if I meant to kill this guy, I ended up killing this woman instead. So there, one opinion says cities of refuge. That's considered to be accidentals. I didn't intend that person. The other opinion says, no, you intended to kill and you killed. The fact that you intended to kill A and killed B does not take away the fact that you intended to kill and killed. Okay? But I don't want to divert too much on that.
Okay.
Right? But what we do clearly see from here is we're differentiating between the death of the pregnant woman and the death of the fetus or fetuses. And therefore, it seems that it's not going to be considered full life and a full murder. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, there is something called a rodef. And again, from this now, the Mishnah in Ohalot, the Mishnah is the Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah passed down to us from Moshe on Sinai. So we're going to again see a differentiation. Ha'isha shehi maksha leleid, a woman who is having extreme difficulties in childbirth, and as the English puts in, we're talking about where the mother's life is in danger. What do? Mechatchin et havlad b'me'eha. We will cut apart the baby inside the womb, umotzian ota evarim, and take this now dismembered fetus out in order to save the life of the mother. Mipnei shechayeha kodmin lechayav. Her life takes precedence over the baby's life. All right, and that was in the article that we began with about the Florida case or the Florida article, right? Across the board, right? Everyone from a halachic point of view would say if it's endangering the life of the mother, then the baby can be aborted. That is clear. However, Yatsa Rubo, once most of the child has already exited and has been born, Ein Nogin Bo. We don't touch that child. We can't do anything to the child. She'ein nefesh mipnei nefesh. We don't push aside one life for the life of another. Okay, now that's going to be a little bit But in a case of a rodef, if one person is pursuing someone else to try to kill that person, we do take out that person's life in order to save the life of another person. So we'll have to touch upon why even during childbirth, even if the child is mostly born, has mostly exited, why does the child still not have the status of a rodef? But it's clear again from this Mishnah in Ohalot that the unborn child is not yet considered to be equal to the life of a person who is born. The mother's life takes precedence over the unborn child's life. We don't view them as two equal lives. Again, not to say that we dismiss it or that we minimize it, but it's not considered to be a full life, which will allow for certain flexibility in certain situations. Someone else want to ask something before we go further? Did I see a hand up before? Yeah, Cheryl.
Well, two things. One is that technology today is so advanced that they could perform a C-section probably and save both of them. And the other thing I was thinking is that the baby doesn't have the soul because it isn't breathing yet. It's the breath that makes it
Okay,
active.
Exactly when the soul comes in, that's something that we can't measure. The same way that we've had before, we could have again on the halachic time of death, brain death, all those things, right? A person dies when the soul leaves the body, but there are no medical instruments that can measure that, right? And therefore, that is another issue, which we'll probably see next week, that comes up also in terms of our approach to abortion. We'll see how Rav Moshe's approach, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal, who is the leading halachic authority of the Torah world through the 1990s, how he approached the government and legislation when it came to time of death. And that was in broad strokes saying, why don't you guys step back and let us do what we do according to our religion, right? Even though there will be those Jews who, using that latitude, might choose to go against what the halacha says, but we prefer to have the latitude than have the government starting to get involved. But we shall see. We shall see.
But getting
Yes.
back to the soul and it entering the body, just literally what the Torah says is Hashem breathed it into us. So I'm thinking,
Into Adam.
what?
Into Adam. Into Adam.
Well, I think that means everybody.
Again,
I don't know.
I don't think, we also have
Okay.
teachings that the child in the womb has this full heightened spirituality, and it knows Kol HaTorah Kula, the entire Torah, which means that, as I understand it, the person is still in a spiritual realm before it enters this world and all the confusion that this world brings, and therefore it has this full knowledge of Torah, of all spirituality. So it definitely has, some life, vitality, and spirituality even beforehand, right? Something that will not come up in this class, but I've mentioned it elsewhere. There is a teshuva responsa from of Moshe about a family that kept losing their children during pregnancy, and it was starting to really impact the emotional health of the parents, of the mother. So it was a question of birth control, right? Just to avoid that whole thing, and according to the basic halacha, right, a person needs to keep trying to have children until they have one boy and one girl. Right? We had our 5 boys before we had our first girl. Um, so there was a question about birth control, and Rav Moshe. I have to see it again. I only saw it a long time ago, but worth it for me to see it, to find it again and see it again for myself. But as I understand, as I recall, the tshuva was that if it's too much for you, yes, you can go on to birth control, but you should know that for whatever reason, Hashem has chosen you, your husband, to be the vehicle through which all of these neshamot, all these souls that need to just have a few months, whatever it is, in a womb before they can continue in their spiritual journey. They've chosen you to do this, to be this incredible, do this incredible chesed, kindness for each of those souls. So you should know that there is meaning to what's happening, but if it's too much for you, then you can, so to speak, recuse yourselves and use birth control. So there again, there is certainly a certain spirituality that exists, right? Whether it's the potential, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but certainly we don't view it simply as a bunch of cells that are developing, but there is more to it than simply that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go a little bit further, and then we'll need to pick up next week. Okay, so part 3, the prohibition against abortion, right? Is it murder, right? We heard from 4 of Moshe, lo tirtzach. Is it potential life, or is it that we're damaging the woman, as we saw in that case from Mishpatim when the 2 guys were fighting? So Rambam, in the laws Hilchot Ritsikha Ushmirat Haguf. Now this is very interesting. Look how Rambam titles this category. The laws of Ritsikha. Ritsikha means murder. Shmirat Haguf means guarding the body, which connects what we were saying before about being that prudent steward. Harezu mitzvah lo ta'aseh, the Rambam writes there. We have a prohibition. Shelo lachus al nefesh harodef, to not take pity on the life of a rodef. Again, a rodef is literally one who's pursuing, and classic rodef is one who is pursuing someone else to try to kill that person. And therefore, we do not have any pity on this person and kill him to save the life of the person that he is pursuing. But now we're going to see that the Rambam gives the fetus the status of a rodef. And therefore, right, let's hear what he says. Lefikach, therefore, horu chachamim, our sages have instructed, sha'ubra, that this fetus, she makshalele, who is having lots of serious, fatal issues during childbirth, he's ruling based on that Mishnah and Olot that we quoted above. One is allowed to dismember this fetus in the womb, Bain Bisam, Bain Biyad, whether one is using some drugs, medication, Bain Biyad, or whether it's being done with a knife by one's hand, V'meishehu karodef achareha laharga, because we view it that it's as if he is chasing the mother in order to kill her. So now the Rambam gives the status of a rodef to this ubar. Based on that, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who I mentioned before, the preeminent posek, wrote, Levarer, let's go right to the English, abortion is forbidden as murder, both for Gentiles and Jews. As murder, he says. Why? Where is he getting this from? He's getting this from the Rambam, who viewed it as a rodef. And in case of a rodef, you're allowed to go ahead and murder. Rodef is bringing in the realm of murder. Therefore, the law is that there is a complete prohibition of murder derived from the verse, you shall not murder. That's 10 commandments, even regarding a fetus, except that the killer is not liable for the death penalty. So if the child is not threatening the life of the mother, then it would be considered to be murder to kill that child, to abort that fetus. There's another way of looking at it, and that is what we've been discussing, which is the potential life. The Mishnah in Yuma teaches us, Ubra shehiricha, a pregnant woman who smells food and feels a strong craving to eat that food, and it happens to be Yuma deals with the laws of Yom Kippur, Machilin ota, we will feed her ad shetashiv nafsha. Now, we're not talking about pickles and ice cream over here. We're talking about she has this overwhelming craving for something, and we're concerned that her not having that craving, at least in the times of the Talmud, the general consensus was that in the absence of her having that which she's craving, that could have a very harmful effect on the mother and or on the baby. And therefore, what do? We feed her. Okay? Now, this is having the mother do something that is prohibited, eating on Yom Kippur, to save her life, we understand. But even if it won't affect her life, but it might affect the life of the fetus. And therefore, we are allowed to, she should go ahead and eat. So we see that we are violating Torah laws for this fetus. Why? Well, if it's not considered fully alive, certainly is potential life. And that too will override the different prohibitions of the Torah. Similarly, number 16 is the Ramban Nachmanides, not Maimonides. As far as the observance of mitzvot is concerned, we would violate them for the fetus' sake. For the Torah says to violate one Shabbat for his sake, since if he is saved, he has a chance to observe many more Shabbatot. Therefore, even for the sake of a fetus that is less than 40 days post-conception, that we'll come to next week, we'll soon see about the different stages, that as of yet has no life to it at all, we would still violate the Shabbat in accordance with the opinion of the author of halachot, the Bahag, known as. On that, Rabbi Vosner points out, Rav Vosner is a Rav, lived in Bnei Brak. It is obvious that since it is permissible according to Torah law to desecrate Shabbat in order to facilitate the development of a fetus into a person obligated to keep mitzvot, then even more so it is forbidden according to Torah law to wantonly, key word, wantonly, to wantonly kill it for the very same reason. But that does not make doing so actual murder. Okay, we'll see two more. The Maharit says, Tosfot writes in Sanhedrin and Chulin, although one is not liable for killing a fetus, it is not permitted. The base of the prohibition is the law forbidding causing injury, right? So that becomes very interesting, causing injury when the person wants that injury, when the mother is begging to have that injury, right? We're still not supposed to cause someone injury. Okay? And lastly, let's just see the Zohar to balance all of this. The Zohar in Shemot says, Hahu ubra demit abra itite vigarim lekatalale bimaha desatir binyana de kuchabricho v'umanata delay. one who causes a fetus in the womb of its mother to be killed, destroys God's work and craftsmanship. The kuchubrichu istalek me alma, and causes God's presence to leave from this world. Dachya shechinata, pushes away the shechina, the divine presence. Whether that's meant to be understood that this child would have a tselem elokim, an image of God, a part of God in him, and now this child will not be born, so there's less godliness in the world, or whether it's meant to be understood that if we don't appreciate the gifts that God wants to give us, then God starts to remove himself and says, well, that's not where I want to be. That's not what you are deserving to have. However we are to understand this, it's clear from the Zohar that it's not something to be taken lightly, to be flippant about. Even if it's not murder, it certainly is potential life. It is a gift. And when one takes a gift and refuses it or throws it back in the face of one who wanted to give that gift, then as we know, the giver of the gift will not be all that eager to give other gifts, whether it's the same gift again or other types of gifts. So, yeah, so that gives us, I think, a very, very nice foundation. Next week we will continue with a little more of the practical application. So where does this bring us now in terms of what is and is not allowed in terms of abortion? Okay, and with that we're going to see the different stages, and we're going to see different rulings from modern day poskim and how that affects us. Okay, so that we will leave for next week. And yeah, good seeing everybody. Let me get back to that screen. There we go. Good seeing everybody, and look forward to joining next week. Next week, the plan is that we will be in person. Okay, next week, B'ezras Hashem, we will have actual lunch along with our learn. So stay posted. Stay posted for that. For those who are not local, I will also stream it, but I'm looking forward to getting back in person for those who can be. A, you get lunch, and B, it makes it a lot more engaging when instead of looking at a bunch of boxes on the screen, I think we could all see each other and appreciate. And also makes it easier for all of you to speak up and bring up points, which is something that I miss when when I have to mute everybody. It's something that I enjoy doing. Okay,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Have a good rest of the week and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Ever good having you join
Thank
us.
you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you.